there's a huge shift to liquid cooling, right? And liquid cooling is not something you just plug in and play. It's a major commitment on both ends. Um, but with liquid cooling, you have this massive demand from your customers to run 40 to 100 kilowatt racks, and the demand is not stopping, it's only increasing. So these legacy data centers that are designed for 150 to 200 watts per square foot, it's not going to work. Hi, it's Chris Pedersen from AP Advisory Group, and you are watching the Data Center Go to Market podcast with Joshua Feinberg.
Hello, it's Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go to Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to have a very special guest joining me today. I'm welcoming Chris Pedersen, who is CEO and founder of AP Advisory Group, based in Nashville. Does a lot of work as well in the Bay Area. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Joshua. Very excited to be here.
Likewise, I think what would be super helpful to understand is how you went along this journey in your career where you were fortunate enough to get it right basically on the 1.0 version. You've been working in digital infrastructure, data centers, and telecommunications nearly your entire career. Was that the plan all along when you were in high school, college, trying to figure out what you were going to do, or did it just kind of happen along the way?
No, it happened by mistake. I After I got it, I played golf in college, and then I w- worked full time after college uh, at bartending, working at a golf course so I could play professional golf, and did the mini tours in California, where I was born and raised in Northern California for 2 years. Back in the '90s, it was called the Nike Tour, and there were some smaller tours as well that I was playing on. So, long story short, I was earning supplemental income. I had some backers financially from my golf club that I belonged to who were helping me on my journey. Golf was going well. I was bartending, meeting a lot of people, business. I was bartending in downtown San Francisco in the Marina District, at a place called the Paragon on Lombard and Scott, very popular bar and upscale. And a friend of mine who worked at AT&T said, "Hey, how long are you going to do this?" I said, "Well, you know, I don't have a plan right now for that, but not hopefully not as long as I have to. I'm hoping something new comes up, and golf is sort of dwindling down." So he said, "Well, listen." He said, "I am working at AT&T. It's going well. We were selling dark fiber network services, all based around bandwidth, and that started my career at AT&T, selling fiber and dark fiber specifically, and it was really interesting. I was intrigued by how data transports itself from one place to another. The minute I walked into the knock, or what we would call a telco pop, right? So not a real true data center, but more of a telco pop. I was intrigued, like I was blown away, and I said, "Wow, this is so cool." And that was in 1997, and that really led to couple of amazing events that happened in my life. The timing just couldn't have been better, and right place, right time. The AT&T fiber job led to me going over to Pacific Bell, and they started opening data centers with SBC Communications. And so they opened two cyber centers, which in today's standards were medium sized to small. One was in Irving, Texas. The other one was in Irvine, California. And I was so pumped to be part of this team, and we were selling fiber and colo like it was I mean, you couldn't keep up with the demand. It was crazy. Google was my one account. To this day, the coolest story I have is you're gonna get a chuckle out of this. So I went to a meeting with Sergey and Larry from Google when they were first started up. This is in '98, and we flew down to Irvine together, not on a private jet or anything. This is before they were in one office. They were in an office probably about 5,000 square feet. And I walked in, I was like, is this a fruit company or what are these guys doing? Is it a candy company or something? And they're explaining to me it's organic search, organic search, organic. And so I'm like, all right, cool. And I I continued to really get to know those guys, and they were so cool. They were really nice. And we went to LA. We did a deal. It wasn't massive, but it was a nice sized deal in Irvine. But the funny part of the story is at the end of the transaction or the deal, uh, Sergey pulled me aside and said, "Hey, hey, Chris, would you be interested in coming to work for Google on our sales team?" And I had just gotten engaged, and I'm like, I would, but and everything was just clicking at SBC and the data center world, and I'm like, I'm gonna pass, but thank you so much. Would have been a life changer, but it is what it is.
That's
So that
amazing.
that was sort of the trajectory from the start. Those are the early years, and then obviously things morphed and evolved into bigger things with I worked at Savis. I've worked for Equinix, obviously. I worked at Telex, which was acquired by Digital. So we morphed into their organization. I've worked for some amazing companies and be truly blessed.
Yeah, when you say right place, right time, I'm thinking like the demand for dark fiber coming in and around San Francisco in the 1990s was probably 5 to 10 years ahead of national rollout to certainly secondary markets, but probably not many other places besides that, Northern Virginia, maybe Dallas or something like that, happening that early. So, yeah, for sure, the unique place, right time of golfing and bartending and happening to bartend in a place where someone that worked for AT&T came in and awesome
Yeah,
stuff.
I try to give the advice to I have two kids in college now, right? And my daughter goes is down in Dallas at TCU. My son plays football at Morehead State University, which is a smaller school in Kentucky. Um, and the one thing I tell them is meet as many people as you can, network as much as you can, be social, and just get out there as much as you can in any way, shape, form, or fashion. So, we have that discussion quite often.
Has it gotten to the point too where their friends come up and want to pick your brains for advice about what it's like in these technology sales related careers?
Oh, oh yeah. There's so the my son's sort of group or ecosystem of buddies is they're all going to be seniors now, and they're getting to the end of their college term and really trying. They're kind of all freaking out, to be frank, because they're trying to decide what am I going to do, right? The $64,000 question. It's so funny too with the girls and the boys. The girls just have it plant dun 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 boom boom boom, and the boys are like, I don't know. Hopefully it works out. And I have to be honest. I said I kind of had the same plan, and we teach spirituality and putting it in God's hands and being connected to something that's bigger than yourself. And so we the kids really trust that, and with especially on the boys, they want to get into something cool and they want to enjoy what they're doing. I've obviously talked about the date. They've heard me say the word data center a cajillion times, and they know what a data center is. I'm just not sure if high voltage and power and AI and everything incorporated with that is for them, but I know that there's an interest level.
Yeah, and I think for sure, even for their friends that wouldn't have normally heard of it 5 or 10 years ago because
Yeah.
of Jensen Huang and Nvidia, and it got to the point where, if you think about 5, 10 years ago, it made it onto CNBC 4 times a year. Every time one of the big REITs reported, now it's on like almost every single day, and it's crossing over to mainstream stuff. And then there's pushback with grid capacity and everything. For sure, it's a lot more in the headlines than it would have been in the past. But yeah, it's a really interesting observation too of the difference between how your son and daughter have approached their career, one very methodically and the other one kind of figuring out as for sure it happens.
Yeah, I sort of use this as a benchmark that I used to travel a lot, and not just to like one or two markets, but globally. And I let's just use 2010 to 20, let's call it 18, maybe 17 or prior even. I When I would say I'm in the data center business, some people would be like, what what's that? I have no clue what you're talking about. And others would say, oh, I've heard of data center. It's kind of like fiber. That's always what they. And so I'd say, yeah, you're down the right road. But now, we have a huge family on my wife's side. We're almost over. I think we're over 32 now with new ads. But um, when my family on my wife's side's, here's data center, they're always texting me or sending me articles or something on it. And when the data center market now is part of mainstream, it's part of the everyday conversation. And with the evolution, so Nvidia's played a huge role in having that data center term really become a household name. But I also have to give a lot of credit to Google and Yahoo, because if it wasn't for Google and Yahoo, it would be. Um, I don't think the data center would have a popular name as it does today. And with that in parallel Equinix. So I kind of use those three companies as benchmarks, and they played really important roles in the evolution of data center.
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting too on the positioning and the branding around the idea of a data center. Because I was doing a lot of work in Microsoft's small business and channel partner ecosystem in the late 1990s, and they were thinking subscription all the
Hmm.
way back then. And maybe 5, 6, 7 years later, they started experimenting with acquiring Hotmail and doing things like that. But the reality is, it's only really been in the last 10 years that Azure has become a really, really strong force in cloud and digital infrastructure like that.
Yeah, exactly. With back when I was at Savvis, I managed the Yahoo account, and on the Yahoo team was Christian Belady, Tom Furlong, Casey Mayers, and there was one more big name. I just forgot it off the top of my. But I called it the dream. I called them the dream team, because getting to know them professionally and staying connected to them after Savvis had. I cannot share with you the doors that those relationships have opened, um, and and I'm forever grateful, obviously. But they were instrumental in my success and have helped me along the way, um, building on top of my career and getting to the next level. And um, I learned when I was managing that Yahoo account for Savas, and those guys were there. It was such a great learning experience. I mean, on top of making good money, but the experience that I heard from them, and the trajectory where they were going. with the company and their future. It was just I learned so much knowledge from them. It was really enticing, and one of the best experiences in the industry.
Because you happen to have been in the place where you were the primary telecommunications
Yeah,
partner at that time. Yeah.
yeah. And Sabis was their major footprint provider, um, and they were expanding globally with us. And so the again, right place, right time, staying connected to those guys. Casey and Casey Mears. I'm sure you've heard of him or heard his
Yeah.
name. Or he's a great guy. He lives up in Nevada, by Reno, and he and I looked at doing a real big project up in the Nevada region, right outside of Reno, before Apple and Tesla and Q or Switch was up there. He and I and another partner, Kevin Louie, who was one of the founders of 365 Main, who got bought by, he was part of 365 Main. They got bought by Digital. That was back in '08. But the three of us were going to build a huge data center campus out there. And the power was just, it was clean energy coming in, and all the zoning was ready. We couldn't get the permits in time. The permits process was like, I'm not kidding. It was, it would be like me trying to change an engine without experience in my truck. It didn't work, and a little frustrating. We were a little, we had a few of the right people, but not everyone in place. But great learning experience again, and that was just one example of how my relationships with those guys and sort of helped me forward in the future years.
So we're both Gen X. We're both at the stage where from time to time people will approach us and ask for advice. If you
Hmm.
were to run into someone you hadn't seen in maybe 10 years that you worked with in a previous role and they say, Chris, great to see what you're working on.
Yeah.
And you sensed over breakfast or lunch that they were a little bit stressed out, a little burned out, and they're looking for advice on how to pivot, kind of get their career back on track, staying in something client facing within digital infrastructure. What advice would you offer to a friend like that?
Yeah, good question. Actually, I had a similar scenario come up recently with a good colleague. So I would suggest two tracks. One is, what I suggested to my friend when we met was, to really dive into the network and figure out a plan, write it out. I've become a very, and I wish I adopted this earlier in life. Obviously, hindsight's 2020, but I'm a big fan of writing everything and seeing everything and visualizing and understanding that if you can write that and read it every day, that that plan just becomes subconsciously ingrained in your brain. The the idea that, um, the the more planning and the better, mapping you do for your future will help you in more ways than you can understand. The what I suggested again to my friend was mapping it out, writing out where you want to go, what you want to do, what makes you happy. Like, not take the financial. Sometimes you have to just take the financials out of it and just step back and say, what reward do I want to get out of my work? I mean, do I get up in the morning and say, I love what I'm doing? Can you honestly say that? That's the one question I asked him. And then said, yeah, probably not. I said, well, if it's not, I think it was in real estate, and he was trying to get back into tech, and the real estate was really, becoming frustrating for him. And so I suggested to him, you know, looking at a few companies that are hiring, seeing how your background and your knowledge can bring value day one, not just, I'm going to have to ramp up to a certain level with this company, but what can you bring to the company day one? Is there a relationship you can bring? So what the way I positioned it, we'll just say for conversation, his name's John. I said, John, they're going to want to know day one what value add you can bring. So is that a relationship? Is that a conversation with a new customer that you know or have sold to? Is that a customer that is there a customer that you can connect them with that can bring them future business? So it's all about the value add. What's your value proposition to them, not just vice versa. And so you've got to make it you've got to make it parallel. You've got to make it reciprocal. It's got to work both ways, and that's the way. That's one of the things when I go into conversations now. It's I think not only how can they help me, but how can I help them more? Because once I help them solve or bring revenue or bring opportunity, then that'll come back to me as well.
That actually brings up a really interesting related question of what you're contributing to a new employer on day one. I talk a lot about the professional branding and people being better positioned as like trusted advisors and consultants as opposed to traditional salespeople. Do you see that continuing to trend to accelerate? Is it going to get to the point where everyone in tech sales at some point will need to be doing something like this, needs not only speaking, but podcasting, speaking at
Yeah.
webinars? Is that a core part of the playbook to stay relevant?
So that's just such a great question. And I I think about this, Joshua, and that is when the pandemic happened in 2020, everybody was at home, especially in California. I mean, it was shut down. And if you went down to get gas or food, it was very unusual to even see a car on the road at that. It was really bizarre, as you can, I'm sure, relate. But the the one thing that I started doing was watching some content of content providers that I've never watched before, and one of them was Gary V. And Gary V, God bless him. I mean, he's got such a way with words, and just he pushes the content so hard. And I didn't really understand how relevant it was to push content every day, but it is so relevant that um, any of the financial institutions that I consult for, um, they talk to me about promoting or advertising and that, and organic content, social, and a lot of them don't have experience in that field, and so they're sort of taking a step back on some of their strategies. And I wouldn't say, organic content is everything, but it's definitely part of the strategy for sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, and specifically around the backdrop of financial services. One of my early jobs that I had in enterprise IT was working in support for Merrill Lynch Global Research at World Headquarters, and one of the biggest departments we supported at the time was compliance, where
Oh
like you
yeah, yeah.
literally weren't allowed to put out a sentence without it running through compliance. And I see what's really interesting 20, 25 years later is I still see people that work for companies that are literally forbidden from doing any kind of what's considered media because they really don't differentiate between someone going on Bloomberg and being interviewed on a podcast that might reach a couple hundred people. So it's a culture challenge for a lot of companies to figure out how much
Yeah.
trust they're going to have in allowing people to have their own professional brands as opposed to everything having to be scripted and centrally coordinated.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And so with content becoming so popular in so many different platforms, um, I think it's important for companies to loosen the what am I the muzzle or the collar, loosen the collar a little bit, and let salespeople or marketing go out and try new organic, you know, whether it be content on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. I mean, with TikTok, it's exploded. It's absolutely exploded. Um, when I when I first saw TikTok, I said, this is going to change everything." It, I was I'd never seen anything like it, and I was very impressed.
What's interesting too is even if you didn't click with TikTok originally, TikTok has just filtered its way through everything. First, it went to Instagram and Facebook, then it went to YouTube. YouTube's experimenting now with longer, short
Hmm.
form videos, and now just recently, a couple of weeks ago, LinkedIn puts a vertical form video right in its mobile app, so you can see the direction that it's going in. So the question is like, are they all leaning towards thinking that the world is moving to having no attention span anymore and
Yeah,
won't watch a 45-minute to an hour video? Or some people will watch that, but they want to give people choice. And but not all the
yeah,
vertical videos are super short either. TikTok has experimented. YouTube's now experimenting with longer vertical videos. LinkedIn has had fewer restrictions. I think at the end of the day, all they really want to do is monopolize your minutes. So you spend more minutes and more hours on that platform every week.
yeah. And what, you know, one of the biggest complaints about TikTok I'm hearing, um, and this is not only from like my own family, my wife and my kids, but others, is there's they're over they don't want to hear about people selling them stuff anymore on there. So you know, if you're scrolling through and you've got 5 videos, they're saying at least 3 of them are selling something, whether it's a T-shirt or a book or some gadget you could put on your wrist to count your steps, or you know, whatever it is. But the advertising has gone to another level on TikTok, and that's the complaint that I'm hearing about that. People want the people that I know that are on TikTok, they want entertainment. They want to get a laugh. They want to be amused of some sort, and so they don't look at it as, you know, if they I you know, I bought a book off TikTok. I'll be the first to say I bought the book off TikTok, but I don't go on there obviously looking for things to purchase or or if I'm, you know, I'm a big golfer still. If I'm looking for a specific golf tool or a new club that just came out, my first go to is not going to be TikTok, right? It's still going to be good old fashioned Google, and it's funny to say, but it really is.
What's interesting too is over the course of 10 years, I've heard a lot of pushback from people in the data center sales and marketing roles, just data center in general, that they don't like social media or they don't want to make time for social media. But what's really interesting over the course of the last 8 or 10 years is it's come very sharply into focus that if you understand your personas and their preferences, you really don't need to be everywhere. If you're just trying to hit people that are running digital transformation and technology related jobs and facilities, and it's really, really coalesced very tightly around LinkedIn. But yeah, it's become a lot more obvious than it was 10 years ago that if people have very limited time, that LinkedIn is going to be the predominant platform. And then if there's going to be a second, in most cases, it usually ends up being YouTube that makes the most sense because you can educate and build trust faster. There's a deeper emotional connection, and it's the backdoor into search which on top, as the search engine results pages get more disrupted, YouTube, I don't think has really been subject to the same kind of, hey, we need to really rethink our ads model the same way the traditional Google search results page has been. Although with that whole space, if you're potentially looking at a breakup of Google, who knows what the changes are going to be with that going forward.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I just saw that um Well, let me back up. So I in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, I had a tough time delineating, okay, how do I differentiate Yahoo and Google? And I still looked at them as organic search, and I was definitely a more Yahoo focused search engine guy. And then there was one time where I put something in Google and the results that came back were mind blowing, and I said, "All right, that's it. I'm done." And it was a game changer for me that personally. I mean, Google has separated itself as, primarily, and it's one of the top tools we use every day, right?
Yep. On top of it, it seems like they also have won the battle, not only in market share, but part of the reason they won it is they did a better job of keeping the crap out of the engine, of blocking people from gaming the system with continuing to change the way the algorithm, and then naturally over time with getting into adjacent businesses. And that's probably where the uh, government related issue is, that by controlling Android and controlling Google apps and just buying more and more related businesses, acquiring YouTube, they have had this just massive expansion effect of mindshare and ecosystem, plus the
Yeah.
deals with other OEMs.
Yep. Exactly.
But
Um, yeah. Go ahead.
it's just super interesting to see how search has evolved, how it's taking it, and now you look at search through the lens of like, okay, is OpenAI, is Copilot, is Claude, is Perplexity, are they going to potentially displace search? But oh yeah, there's a big implication for data centers too, because it takes 10 times more power and the world's running out of power. So there's this externality where people don't realize that, yep, it's super convenient to get Copilot to save you the work of having to click through to 10 separate sites and aggregate it all together.
Yeah.
Um, but it's either that or 50% of your neighbors can drive EVs. Pick one.
Yeah. The AI automation and OpenAI tool itself have become of our everyday life. Um, I can honestly tell you, my kids use it every day, if not 4 or 5 times a day for college. And that's not, they don't use it to cheat and write papers. By the way, their professors have gotten to a point where if you use OpenAI and it assists you with, let's call it, writing a paper or addressing an answer that's not multiple choice or true false, then all you have to do is disclose it on the bottom in the references, and you're good. And they've accepted that. The chat GPT and OpenAI conversation got to a point where it was so prevalent and so paramount that they just said, we're not going to do this. You just have to reference it like you were taking something from a book and putting it into the paper, and then putting it on the bottom of the paper, and referencing the material you used. And it's part of everyday life in college. It's part of I wouldn't say everyday life, but I mean, I use chat GPT for business purposes 3 times a week, easily.
Yeah.
Easily.
And even if you're not directly using it, there's many apps that basically are essentially a front end for the same technology. It's changed SaaS quite dramatically.
Yeah, and the big so these companies, the infrastructure as a service companies, CoreWeave, Lambda, Crusoe, Vulter, Surascale, these companies are making monumental strides, and they're becoming part of the the daily conversations with the Equinexes and the Digital Realty. And CoreWeave's building their own data centers. They're not just. I believe they do have some Equinix pops globally, but they're fundamentally building their own data centers. I know they're building one over in Europe right now, and then they're building another one, I believe, in Asia, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, it's crazy, and these companies are just exploding with demand.
The Data Center Go to Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go to market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
So we're talking about a lot of the upside in the hockey stick growth in the data center industry with digital demand fueled by generative AI and high performance compute. But when you look at what else is going on in the industry, what do you feel are what's the big oversight? What's the big mistake? What's the big something that everyone seems to be doing wrong that you wish people would look at a little differently that would take the industry in a more productive direction?
So, great question, and one of the topics that I get asked quite a bit. Um, you know, there's a huge shift to liquid cooling, right? And liquid cooling is not something you just plug in and play. It's a major commitment on both ends. Um, but with liquid cooling, you have this massive demand from your customers to run 40 to 100 kilowatt racks, and the demand is not stopping, it's only increasing. So these legacy data centers that are designed for 150 to 200 watts per square foot, it's not going to work. I was in a customer lab 2 3 weeks ago, and they're running, this is a lab, so they were sort of playing with some GPUs, and um they're running basically air conditioning and fans to see if that will cool it, and it wasn't sufficing. They tried to air cool it, and it was so warm in that lab that they couldn't maintain the um the environment that they were trying to, the ambient temperature in there. It was just way too warm, and you could feel it the moment you walked in. It just hit you in the face. So, one of the big topics that I discuss daily is liquid cooling, and how liquid cooling can really be prevalent and beneficial to companies.
So, with that in mind, do you envision that there's hundreds of thousands of square feet of facilities that are going to be obsolete, or is there a hand-me-down effect where, well, one of the big hyperscalers doesn't need it anymore, but a small independently owned colocation operator picks it up for pennies on the dollar and still has some usage for it, or are those use cases kind of out the window as everything moves towards needing GPUs and these high density workloads going forward?
So the majority of new builds will be AI focused, is what I'm seeing, just in the market. The the legacy, so data centers built, in 2000 to 2020, these data centers are not equipped to run 50 kilowatt racks, and maybe one or two, but if you stack 50 of them in a row or spread them out a little bit, it's not going to work. It's just way too much heat. And so liquid cooling um, is just, it's mandatory. There's no other option right now other than to either use direct to chip cooling or immersion cooling. Personally, I'm a big fan of the immersion cooling, and I think that's going to gain a lot more traction over the next few years. but direct to chip seems to be on the forefront and preferred by many clients today. The demand for GPUs obviously is not stopping, and it will be I feel like with the demand for GPU and CPU compute, the demand is going to increase much more over the next 3 years. I think we're at the beginning stage of the hockey stick growth, and we've had a we're there's a lot of tailwinds still, but with all these data legacy data centers coming to retrofit and coming to market with higher densities, it's going to be a game changer, and customers are going to have to shift the way they do business as well if they want to be, in my opinion, that if a new customer for you pick anyone, Digital, Equinix, in my opinion, if they want to run low density racks, that's going to be a problem. And Equinix and Digital, in my opinion, are going to push them to run warmer, push them to be more efficient, and push them, if they're not going to use 10 to maybe 15 kilowatts per rack, then put them on bare metal, put them on a hosting platform, something different or alternative where they can go out and use their existing infrastructure. And Equinix bought Packet a few years back. I think it was 2019, 2018, 2020, something like around there. And they have a bare metal platform now, and so there's clients they could put on there day one.
So liquid cooling's really forcing these changes. That's accelerating the obsolescence of these pre-2020 facilities. So what happens to these legacy facilities? Is it the same thing that's going to happen to a lot of office buildings? Is it the same thing that's going to happen to a lot of retail space where it's way too expensive to retrofit? And it's kind of like what happens when someone buys an old house that's 60 years old on a street and just buys it for the land? Levels it and starts over.
And that's the big conversation happening right now is how do companies take their existing data centers and retrofit them? So I was consulting for one company. I cannot say the name, unfortunately, but they're not a colo. They're not a colo, but they're an enterprise business, and they have low density data center. That's the best way to put it. It's 150, maybe 175 at best. They're in the process of shifting the fundamental way the data center works, and the way they're going to do it is they're going to break it down in certain clusters, and so it'll be 65% GPU high density CPU compute, and then the rest will be those storage and low density applications that are not significant to their everyday mission criticality of their business. And so the shift though from that existing data center to the high density is the biggest move. That's going to be the planning of that is it's a big undertaking and will take at least 24 months to shift that. Um, the liquid cooling towers they're bringing in alone are they just they need space. You got to install them outside, and they're not something you just plug in and play. These towers are significant. They take up land, and they're going to be part of your, whether you're there's room on your near your gens, or you have extra yard space, or even maybe you have a substation on land, put it next to or closer to the data center. So um yeah, it's happening today. The shift has begun, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
I imagine there's a lot more consolidation that's going to continue to happen because all of this is so capital intensive.
Yes, I I see that happening. I know of some happening, and I can tell you that it's my estimation that some of the smaller providers, um, just in terms of colo, um, those smaller providers, if they have good P&L and strong balance sheets, they're going to be gobbled up. They're just, if they have, and if their customer base is solid. I mean, I see these conversations happening, and yeah, it's a good time to be in the colo business. I'll tell you that right now, or any type of infrastructure as a service. It's a strong market right now.
Someone approached me a couple of weeks ago looking for advice that he was raising funds and wanted to know what a $5 or $10 million investment would do for a purpose-built co-location facility. I said, not my primary of expertise, but it sounds like that sounds like what you would have done 15, 20 years ago to make a dent, and that really doesn't make much of a dent anymore in that kind of business.
Yeah, unfortunately, that wouldn't even start the conversation.
Yeah, so
So I'll give you there's a data center being planned right now. A shovel has not gone in the ground. The land the land is under contract. They have not exchanged dollars yet, or any type of monetary. And from the renderings, from the attorney fees, from the permitting fees, the zoning, all of that, and it's a major, 400-500 megawatt campus. I think they're at 2.5 million in fees, are just out of pocket. That's nothing's hit the ground. Nothing has got, no shovels, no tractors, nothing's done anything yet. And um, so yeah, but one, this is gonna be a little bit of a shift, but one thing I wanted to mention, and this came up the other day through um, a colleague of mine who was in the data center business and got out. He said he wanted to do something else, and so he started his own business. And I said, "Hey, more power to you." But his son just graduated like 3 years ago, and so he was uh, he was doing real estate, and he wasn't enjoying it, and so he came to me and said, "What do I do to get in the data center business, and how can I be successful? What are the best things I can do to really boost my career?" And he was interviewing with a couple companies, and I said, the the one thing that I did that was so instrumental in my success was, at conferences, be the guy who's either staying to break it down, be the guy who's the last one in the booth when the stragglers are walking around the conferences, because those business cards that you get from those stragglers are life changers. And I'm going to tell you an example why. It was 2012, and the Telex Digital merger had just been announced. I think I stayed for another 6 months, or it was a short period. Um, but I had met a friend through a local government agency in California, and he and I went and had coffee. Again, I got his business card working the booth at a conference in San Francisco, and it was 5:15. Everyone was at the bar. Literally, everyone was already drinking beers and sucking down wine and cocktails, and I was younger, so I said, "Yeah, screw it. I'm going to work the booth and see what happens." And it was literally the best decision of my life because it changed everything. And that card led to myself and a partner building out a data center for a government entity, and we were the LLC. We were their operator. Um, we signed a 10-year deal, and it changed my life. That's the best way to put it. And those relationships today are still very solid. And what I can tell you is, if you're looking for that big strike to happen, it never does, but it always happens when you're never looking for it. And it's amazing how many stories I hear, whether it's business or someone's found a new girlfriend or boyfriend, and they're just striking up, and it's so common that I hear, I wasn't even looking for it, it came out of nowhere. And I just sort of roll my eyes like, yep, that's how it works. So that's just a little tidbit of how, working the conference, being the last person in the booth to close it down or do cleanup or collect all the data and the tchotchkes, and just being present is a big, it's a big yes, yes, yes for a career. And so my closing point to my friend's son was, be as present as you can and get your face in front of the people that you need to meet, and be the guy that says, is someone willing to? Boom, me. Be that guy.
Always volunteering. It's interesting too with the maximizing the booth, is if you strictly look at it from being a good steward of your company's investment in the show. Say for argument's sake, the booth fully loaded was $100K investment for that show, and it was open 20 hours. The expo floor was open for 20 hours over the course of the conference.
Yeah.
Not being there that last hour, you just threw away $5,000. And in the whole scheme of things, that may not be a huge part of your annual marketing budget. But if you talk to someone and said, okay, that was 25% of what our LinkedIn ads budget was supposed to be for that month, and and there was literally nobody there covering it. And the reality is, you're right, is if 80% of the booths have shut down already and you're one of the last ones standing, and someone was using that hour to go around to look for what's new in the industry.
Yeah.
It's like you've eliminated 80% of the competition for their attention.
Exactly. And that's so well said. And that dovetails into one more topic on that I wanted to share, was the when everyone's at a conference from a company, you could tell, because everyone gathers and they're mumbling, bumbling around the booth. And you can tell the vice presidents or the C levels by the way they interact when a customer or someone new comes in to their booth. And so you have a new opportunity, or a new logo, let's call it, walks in, and they're interested in what you do and they want some material. The executives or the VPs will step back. The sales folks or the go-getter will start talking to them. And I would like to see that shift, where those VPs and those C levels are out front with the salesperson saying, "Hey, Mike Smith, nice to meet you." Blah blah blah. Really show the interest, and yeah, meeting someone or a new company for the first time is awkward. Yeah, everything's awkward, but who cares? That's how relationships start. That's how customer conversations start. That's how this business, it without these relationships, the business would go stale. And the networking is, some of these companies look at conferences as, oh, we're going to go get deals here. Don't don't focus deals, focus relationships, focus networking, and having a new contact for your Rolodex, and a new customer, or a new colleague to discuss opportunity with, and maybe they can get you into someone that you need to get into through a back door, or through a front door, or through another friend. So yeah, big fan of the conference shows, being present, front and center, and always showing face.
Chris, when you look ahead into your crystal ball, what do you think is going to change about being in a client-facing role, being in a consulting role in digital infrastructure with 2, 3, 4 years out from now?
Great question. So I can answer that two ways. So a lot of the data centers being built right now, around the world, by the way, that's not just in the US, are pre-leased, meaning they're 100% pre-sold, and that the clients that are buying those are designing that data center in parallel, specifically with the end user, and that is a big win for the data center company, obviously, because they're going to not just build that one, because if it goes well, they're most likely going to build others, and it's just going to steamroll. And so you have you have a huge opportunity with that client, and the the AI demand and the AI boom, if you will, is not stopping anytime soon. And from not just hardware, mechanical infrastructure, real estate, um, and other smaller factors, but those three big ones, with what I'm seeing in that demand push, I mean, we're talking 2030. That's the timeline that we're looking at right now for trajectory.
So when you see the projections like Michael Dell seeing 100-fold increase in data center demand over the next 10 years, Jensen Huang predicting $1 trillion going into upgrading hyperscale facilities in the next 4 years, you're seeing that happen out in the field.
Yes, and I personally, obviously Jensen's mega smart, and I think his number's conservative. I just think the demand and the supply is at two different levels right now, and for what I'm seeing on the demand side, they can't build them fast enough. They can't. There's a colleague of mine is building a 1,000 megawatt data center campus in Tennessee, and he cannot open the door probably till 2028 with power and clean energy. And it's unfortunate because he could probably get it built in 2 years, but obviously without the power, game over.
So do you see that these are the use cases where people are seriously considering self-generation or considering these small modular reactors, or is it literally just he's sitting on his hands for another 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, let's put it this way. He doesn't want to launch it without, negotiated PPA rates in place for committed power. And so he's got a lot of renewable strategies going on the back end. Solar, fuel cell, uh, there's some new, what's the other one? There was one more I can't remember top of mind, but the renderings look unbelievable. And it's not that he could run theoretically he could run the whole data center on solar and fuel cell. Like, if you just map it out from a mathematical perspective, he could he could do that. But from a reliability and redundant perspective, it's not a great idea. Plus, your end users are never going to sign off on that. So the design, the demand, the the data center reliability and functionality is going to be paramount to that end user.
What's interesting is I've had a lot of conversation the last couple of months in the Nordics where I see increasingly these partnerships between the utility companies for district heating and the colocation operators. So if the utility companies are really the limiting factor in so much of this, curious your thoughts on why more utility companies haven't decided to get into the data center operator business.
That's a great question. The the a lot of the utility guys I know, um, obviously the data center business has been a windfall for them, and their revenues have never been higher. But what I will tell you is that there are alarm bells going off in Washington, and that's the problem. And with the alarm bells going off, it raises a lot of red flags, and it's only going to get bigger. That's all I can say is I don't see any sort of leveling or slowdown. And we have some markets now where I wouldn't say moratorium, but there's a pause on how much power you can get. Um, and some of these markets just don't have power. Silicon Valley, Santa Clara. I mean, don't even ask. It's just not there. And yeah, so and right now Nashville's the same way. There's no power for new data centers. That is for new data centers, and so one of the things that I'm seeing is that concern in government concern over data centers and the growth that they're having and how it's going to have this impact on our environment. Now there are strong ESG strategies, um, but the grid and the utility is still paramount and number one in everyone's design and everyone's equation. So it's a must have. I mean, the utility has to be part of every data center, and the customers are going to want it. It's not an option. But in the same breath, that you know be aware that Washington is watching, and there's never been as much oversight into data centers as there are today. I'll just say that.
Yeah, and it's even before the world knew who Sam Altman was, going back 4 or 5 years ago. I remember a lot of these conversations that our national grid,
Hmm.
especially in certain regions, was very badly overtaxed and very much needed a lot of upgrades. And then add into it, yeah, the crazy demand for AI and EVs. And it seems the grid that was overtaxed 5 years ago, now it's very easy to see a place. What was the back in that where people say if 50% of your neighbors are driving EVs, what happens to just normal grid demands aside from AI? So it seems like this is probably the place where the bigger investments need to be made.
Yeah, yeah, and I will say that the crypto crew, or the what do they call it, the crypto bros, are these guys are running high powered data centers. They're running GPUs as well, and so um, but all they care about is one thing, and that's price per kilowatt, or down to the penny, right? And when I'm just going to leave it at this. There's a lot of concern in the government right now on how data centers are running. And I think the parallel, that they drew was the amount of data centers. It's either, I think it was in the US or North America, is the same as the country of Japan. So that they both have in parallel the same levels of power usage.
So the U.S. data centers are using as much
Yeah,
energy as the entire country of Japan.
correct. It's either North America. I don't think it was global. I think it was North America. So Canada, US. And so it was the country I know it was the country of Japan, but that's how much power is being used currently by data centers.
Yeah, someone I spoke with a couple of weeks ago mentioned the alarm bells going off in countries where data center energy usage is 10% of a nation's energy usage.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, national policies will for sure come into play. And historically, the utility companies are very fragmented. It's rare that you have utilities that have significant footprint in even more than one state. So this is like the same issues as trying to fix a highly fragmented healthcare system, of how you have a national policy that is aligned when everyone has different priorities around this.
Exactly.
And proximity and latency, even people's concerns about job creation, when historically this isn't, people have to settle for the fact that there's a lot of social benefits, but that don't necessarily align with job creation.
Yes, sir.
So complex issues. This has all been super fascinating, Chris. I really appreciate you sharing so generously all your expertise and what this means in the space and how others can follow in your footsteps. Do you have any thoughts on who would be a great guest to interview next, who loves to talk about the intersection of digital infrastructure and the commercialization, the sales, marketing, product part?
I'd like to suggest a gentleman by the name of John Day. And John is based up in Virginia. He and I go back to I think we met in 2012, 2011, right around that time frame. We met at a software company named Power Assure, and he's a great guy, really smart cat. He is currently the chief sales officer or chief revenue officer for Data Arc or Clean Arc Data. I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong, but it's one of those two. Sorry, I will get that. But John's a great guy. He and I have known each other for a while. He's got great insight, not only on the power side, but on the data center side. He can give you perspectives too on what's going on in Virginia. Oh, here it is. Clean Arc Data Centers. Yep. And John's the chief revenue officer, and he would be a great guy for the podcast. Bring a lot of new perspectives and fresh insight.
That's terrific. I appreciate you sharing that. Chris, if someone wants to follow what you're working on or connect with you, is LinkedIn the best place to reach you and learn about what you're working on?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best site. I don't have a website yet. I've really, everything's by word of mouth and by networking right now, and so and it's just me. So I don't have that demand for, well, I would have the demand for it, but my concern is that things would get a little out of control. And so I'm throttling back and I don't have it on purpose right now, but LinkedIn is the best. Yeah.
Okay. Well, for sure, we'll make sure to include that in the captions and a link to that in the blog and the show notes with that for anyone that wants to reach out and talk more and connect about potentially working with you. But I appreciate you sharing so generously. This has been fantastic to talk about how you originally started out as a aspiring professional golfer and a bartender and a random meeting with someone that came in and talked to you about AT&T and getting to meet the founders in the super early days of Google and just the whole path along the way has been super insightful. I know people in all different parts of the data center ecosystem and all different kinds of roles all over the planet are going to get a lot of value from watching and listening to this interview. So really appreciate it.
Yep. Bartending brought me in the data center business, and it met my wife of 24 years. So, hey, good stuff.
Where everyone knows your name.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Do a sitcom about that. Cool.
I really appreciate the time today. It's been a fantastic interview. Best of luck with the podcast, and anything I can help with, feel free to reach out.
Cool. Been speaking with Chris Pedersen, who is the founder and CEO of AP Advisory Group. Chris spends most of his time in Nashville, but goes back and forth to the Bay Area a lot. And look forward to staying in touch. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Joshua. Thank you.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.